Lady Constance Beaumont's drawing room possessed that particular quality of hushed expectation that comes when art, society, and carefully managed ambition converge in the soft glow of October evening light. The pale, green silk walls, punctuated by narrow mirrors that reflected the room's occupants in fragmentary glimpses, provided the perfect backdrop for what promised to be the season's most discussed private viewing. Through the tall windows, opened just enough to admit the crisp autumn air, the lights of Mayfair twinkled like distant stars, while within, the cream of London's cultural elite moved with the practiced grace of those who understood their precise position in the world's estimation. The centerpiece of the evening, both literally and figuratively, was Miss Vivian Ashford, who stood before Sir Marcus Pemberton's latest masterpiece like a figure who had stepped from a Renaissance portrait into the modern world. Her sapphire blue evening gown caught and held the light with each subtle movement, the silk seeming to flow like deep water around her elegant frame. At 26, she possessed that rare combination of beauty and intelligence that made her both admired and slightly feared by her contemporaries. The famous Ashford sapphires, a necklace that had graced 3 generations of distinguished women, rested at her throat, the stones seeming to hold within their depths the very essence of the dress's magnificent color. The brushwork in this section is quite extraordinary. She was saying to the small circle gathered around her, her voice carrying those cultured tones that spoke of the finest education and natural refinement. Notice how Sir Marcus has managed to suggest movement without sacrificing the essential stillness of the composition. It's rather like capturing a held breath, isn't it? Sir Marcus Pemberton himself stood slightly apart from this admiring group, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he studied his own work with the critical eye of an artist who was never entirely satisfied with his achievements. At 63, he had finally achieved the recognition that had eluded him for decades, but success had brought its own peculiar burdens. His grey beard was neatly trimmed, his evening clothes impeccable, yet there was something in his bearing that suggested a man who had learned to be wary of good fortune. "Miss Ashford has a remarkable eye," he murmured to Timothy Graves, the gallery's thin, nervous assistant curator who hovered at his elbow like a devoted acolyte. "She sees things in the work that I sometimes forget I've put there." Graves adjusted his spectacles with a gesture that had become habitual, his prematurely grey hair catching the light as he nodded. "She's been studying at the Court Hall," he said quietly, though there was something in his tone, a slight tightening around the edges, that suggested this information was not entirely welcome news. "Lady Beaumont mentioned she's considering writing a book on contemporary British painting." Across the room, near a smaller collection of watercolors, Lady Beaumont herself held court with the practiced ease of a woman who had been managing such gatherings since her debutante days 30 years earlier. Her silver hair was arranged with mathematical precision, her black evening gown clearly from one of the better houses, and her manner combined warmth with just enough reserve to remind everyone present of their relative positions in her particular universe. "The reviews in tomorrow's papers should be quite favorable," she was saying to Colonel James Westbrook, her cousin, whose military bearing and slightly bewildered expression suggested a man more comfortable with regimental order than artistic interpretation. "I had lunch with Harrison from the Times last week, and he seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the exhibition." The colonel nodded approvingly, though his attention seemed divided between his hostess's words and the striking figure of Miss Ashford across the room. "Excellent work, Constance. Uncle Henry would be proud of what you've accomplished here." As the evening progressed, the conversations grew more animated, the laughter a touch more frequent, and those subtle undercurrents that exist in any gathering of ambitious, creative people began to surface in ways that only the most observant would notice. Miss Ashford moved through the rooms with graceful confidence, her comments on the artwork revealing both genuine knowledge and careful diplomacy. Yet those who knew her well might have detected a certain restlessness in her manner, a quality of attention that seemed focused on something beyond the paintings and pleasant social chatter. Young Peter Lethbridge, recently returned from his posting in Rome and harboring what everyone pretended not to notice were serious intentions regarding Miss Ashford, found himself drawn repeatedly to her side. His conversation, though perfectly proper, carried an undertone of urgency that suggested a man who had something important to say but lacked the proper opportunity to say it. "I should have liked to see the portrait before the others arrived," he murmured to her during a brief moment when they stood apart from the main group, before opinions began to accumulate like dust on the frame. Vivian's grey eyes held a flicker of something that might have been amusement. Opinions are rather like that, aren't they? They settle whether one invites them or not. She paused, her gaze moving to where Sir Marcus stood in earnest conversation with a distinguished gentleman she didn't recognize. Though I suspect Sir Marcus has already formed his own opinion about his work. Artists always do, you know. They simply pretend otherwise for the sake of social harmony. It was then that the evening's carefully maintained equilibrium suffered its first small disturbance. Miss Ada Moore, Sir Marcus's secretary, appeared at the drawing room's entrance with that particular quality of apologetic efficiency that marked her as someone accustomed to managing the practical details of artistic temperament. She was a woman whose large, careful hands seemed made for turning the pages of ledger books, plain in a way that drew no comment, but possessed of an intelligence that showed itself in the precision of her movements and the careful attention she paid to everything around her. "Sir Marcus," she said quietly, approaching the artist with a folded paper in her hand. "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but this came by special messenger." The gentleman insisted it was urgent. Sir Marcus took the paper with a slight frown, unfolded it, and read its contents with an expression that grew increasingly grave. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. A tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible stiffening of his shoulders. When he looked up, his gaze went immediately to Miss Ashford, and for a moment the social mask slipped entirely. "Is everything quite all right?" Lady Beaumont inquired, her hostess's instincts immediately alert to any disturbance in her carefully orchestrated evening. "Perfectly all right," Sir Marcus replied, though his voice carried a note that suggested the opposite. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Simply a matter requiring attention tomorrow, nothing that need concern us this evening." But the damage, if it could be called that, was already done. The brief moment of tension had been observed by several of the guests, and in such company, nothing went unnoticed for long. Miss Ashford, in particular, seemed to have registered the exchange with unusual interest, her attention now focused entirely on the artist, with a quality of watchful intelligence that transformed her from merely beautiful to something rather more formidable. The conversation resumed its previous pleasant flow, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. The evening light filtering through Lady Beaumont's tall windows seemed suddenly less golden, more uncertain. The sapphires at Miss Ashford's throat caught the light differently, as if they too had sensed the change in atmosphere. It was precisely at this moment, as the guests began to move toward the dining room where a light supper awaited, that the first real shadow fell across the gathering. For those who were paying attention, and in such company, most people were paying attention to everything. There was something in the quality of silence that followed Sir Marcus's brief disturbance that suggested the evening was about to take an unexpected turn. The glittering surface remained intact, the conversations continued their elegant flow, but beneath it all, currents were beginning to stir that would soon disturb the careful equilibrium of this world, where art, money, and social ambition dance their eternal, dangerous waltz. As the guests moved toward the dining room, Miss Ashford lingered for a moment before Sir Marcus's painting, her sapphire dress a brilliant note of color against the muted tones of the canvas. In the soft light, she seemed almost to be part of the artwork itself, a figure caught between the painted world and reality, beautiful, mysterious, and somehow touched by the shadow of events yet to unfold. The evening was far from over, but already those with the sensitivity to perceive such things might have detected the faint but unmistakable scent of approaching storm. Supper at Beaumont House had been arranged as a gentle continuation rather than an interruption. Small tables in the music room, a buffet of agreeable delicacies that seemed designed to keep conversation light and hands unencumbered. The guests moved with the obedient rhythm of those who understand that an evening proceeds in acts. The lamps were shaded, the silver discreet, and the talk, having absorbed and swallowed Sir Marcus's brief disturbance, found again its social level. Miss Ashford did not come at once. She had slipped from the drawing-room a few minutes earlier, trailing a small ripple of curiosity and leaving Peter Lethbridge poised, as it were, in the doorway with an expression of earnest patience that invited teasing he did not receive. Sir Marcus stood with Lady Beaumont, his head slightly bowed, while Miss Ada Moore hovered at a tactful distance. Timothy Graves, more nervous now than before, lingered too long over the white wine, started, and made a small apology to no one in particular. "Shall we have a toast?" Lady Beaumont said, her own glass steady in her hand. "To Sir Marcus, and to the success he so richly deserves." She smiled, and in that smile there was kindness and firm expectation. "Benton, would you find Miss Ashford? She mustn't be left out." The butler, Benton of the good back and the noiseless tread, melted from the room as if into the arrangement of shadows. Peter made a movement as if to follow and checked himself. Ada Moore glanced briefly at Sir Marcus. The artist seemed about to speak and did not. There was a moment's delicate hiatus. Conversation thinned to a filament before taking hold again. The Colonel told Lady Beaumont something about the parade at Aldershot. Graves mislaid his napkin and found it again. From the corridor came the faintest stirring sound, like a breath taken outside a door. Benton returned, not hurried, but with a quality of resolution that reshaped the air. "My lady," he said, approaching just closely enough to avoid being overheard, and yet sufficiently for those who must hear to hear. "Miss Ashford is in the drawing-room. She appears to have fainted." Lady Beaumont paused for the smallest fraction of a second. "You did quite right, Benton. Colonel, Peter, Sir Marcus, if you would. Ada, pray send for Dr. Fellows at once. And quietly, please." They went as people go in a church where a noise would be a sin. Quickly and without clatter. The drawing-room, with its pale green walls and the tall windows open a fraction to the chill, had been emptied of its company and held, again, that captured breath stillness Miss Ashford had admired in Sir Marcus's work. She lay on the Aubusson carpet at a modest angle from the great painting, as if the floor had yielded to her rather than she to it. The sapphire dress, pooling at the hips, had a sea's depth under the lamps. One hand was open, palm upward, with an expression in it, or so Peter, who had reached her first, felt, that suggested surprise domesticated by good manners. The Ashford sapphires at her throat looked for once heavy. "Vivian," he said under his breath. The name fell without answer and did not disturb the room. The Colonel was beside him, all efficient tenderness. He touched her wrist, then the delicate angle of her jaw. He listened, briefly, for the breath. His expression did not change so much as settle. "I'm afraid," he began to Lady Beaumont, who had come as far as the door and no farther, and left the sentence there, as if to complete it would be untidy. Sir Marcus, who had not moved from the threshold, put his hand upon the back of a chair and stood as if taught suddenly how to stand. His face had acquired an oldness that was not age. Ada Moore returned to him a look that he did not take. "There's a smell," Timothy Graves said, then pressed his lips together, chastened by his own voice. "Something almond, or the polish. Forgive me." Benton, who had been in rooms like this at other moments of genteel distress, stepped to the windows and drew them wider by half an inch. The curtains made a discreet sound. "Shall I fetch the screen, my lady?" "In a moment," Lady Beaumont said. Her tone contained the room, the painting, the white space around the event. "Ada." "I telephoned Dr. Fellows," Miss Moore replied, in that practical voice that expected to be useful. "He is at a dinner in Curzon Street, but will come at once." "Thank you." Lady Beaumont hesitated. She looked at Vivian with a grave attention that did not weep and did not perform. Then, "Benton, the police, ask for Scotland Yard, if Chief Inspector Alleyn is available." "Yes, my lady." No one corrected the tense. Peter knelt still, as if by kneeling he might continue a conversation that had only just begun. Near his hand, faint and absurd, lay a champagne glass, its rim marked with the most careful trace of lipstick, as if a young woman had learned to leave no evidence of carelessness. A small napkin, folded upon itself, had fallen with the unruffled logic of a card in patience. Sir Marcus at last came forward, but as he did so, Ada Moore, without touching him, created from herself a barrier that was not quite a barrier. "Sir Marcus," she said, "perhaps you would sit." He did not sit. He looked at the painting over her shoulder, and then down to the girl at its foot. The lines around his mouth made a pattern that would have interested him on paper and now interested him not at all. "It is curious," Lady Beaumont said, almost to herself, "how quiet the street is." And indeed, from the tall windows the city murmured like a distant sea, indifferent and unruffled. Timothy Graves, to his later shame, noticed that the rope before Sir Marcus's canvas had been unhooked and lay slightly awry. He saw, too, that a corner of the catalogue on the side table had been turned down at no particular page. He told himself, like a child rehearsing a lesson, that such things were not to be righted. They waited, as people wait between two kinds of silence. The lamps gave their steady light. The mirrors continued their fragmentary reflections of a company now arranged in attitudes not practiced in society. The girl in the sapphire dress lay very still, as if obedience to stillness had been required of her at last. From the corridor came the far, level sound of Benton's voice upon the telephone, transformed into deference by distance. Somewhere a door closed, properly. Lady Beaumont folded her hands with a composure that had been taught. Peter Luke Lethbridge, Peter, who was young, looked once at the sapphires at Vivian's throat and then away, as if from a bright thing that reproached him. "Thank you, Benton," Lady Beaumont said when he returned. "They are sending someone at once." "Chief Inspector Alleyn, my lady," he replied. "He is on his way." Inspector Roderick Alleyn arrived with the measured inevitability of a figure called forth by circumstance rather than drama. In the calm vestibule of Beaumont House, with its discreet lamps and faint scent of beeswax and flowers, Benton received him with that particular gravity reserved for clergy and policemen. The butler's composure had the fine hairline crack of strain. He lowered his voice without seeming to, as if grief might be kept at bay by pitch alone. "Thank you," Alleyn said. His tone held sympathy without intimacy. He removed his gloves and, after a glance at the small accumulation of hats and coats, let Benton conduct him along the corridor that lapped the edges of the reception rooms. He paused on the drawing-room threshold. It was a painter's tableau, composed as if some ironical hand had contrived it, beauty, stillness, and the clear, cold note of death. The girl lay with her head slightly turned to the left, the dress a sapphire pool, the necklace lending a cold fire to the white column of her throat. Near her right hand, a champagne glass caught the lamplight with the fragile certainty of glassware that has lately been used. The great canvas by Sir Marcus presided from the wall, its harmonies turned suddenly austere. Alleyn registered the almond sweetness in the air, faint and intrusive as an indiscreet remark. He let the room's order impress itself. The open window lifted an inch, the curtain's hem breathing, the mantel clock stepping out its seconds as if they were only that and not particles of a new reality. There was no sign of disturbance. Shock, when it came here, came neatly. "Pray don't move anything," he said, though nobody made the least gesture to do so. He crossed to the girl with the quiet assurance of a man accustomed to these intrusions and looked, without touching. The features were composed. The faintest bloom of lipstick marked the rim of the glass. On the carpet beneath the table leg, only that, a pale, round watermark suggested the glass had once rested elsewhere, not long ago. He followed the look of the necklace to the nape. The clasp lay true, the stones steady as the reputation that accompanied them. A footfall behind him, a doctor, small, grey, conscientious, murmured what Alleyn already knew. The word cyanide was not spoken. It did not need to be. Alleyn let the doctor establish the formalities and stepped back, taking in the people as a single composition, then as individuals. Lady Beaumont watched with an alert stillness one sees in women who have had long practice at conducting difficult evenings to safe harbours. The colonel stood square, hands quiet at his sides, his authority reigned by the domestic sphere. The young man kneeling earlier, Lethbridge, had risen but not recovered. Shock had put a question in his face that he could not yet phrase. Sir Marcus Pemberton kept the better part of the room between himself and the body. His gaze drifted to the painting with the habit of a man who measures things against his craft. Miss Ada Moore, the secretary, had taken refuge in usefulness and stood by the telephone table, steady as an instrument. Timothy Graves, the thin assistant with the anxious hands, looked at the glass, away, and back again. Alan's glance returned to the glass. A clean stem, a small crescent of lipstick at 2 o'clock on the rim. No sugar grains, no trace of coffee or dark residue on the napkin set discreetly under it. He inclined his head towards Benton. "We'll hold the service open, if you please, Mr. Benton. Have the door kept, and may I trouble you to ask your staff not to talk among themselves. We'll need the bottles and any remaining glasses in the dining room put aside." "Certainly, sir." He nodded to the doctor, who withdrew a pace, and then to the doorway where Fox had appeared. Inspector Fox, large, mild, imperturbable. A glance served. Fox moved away to see to the outer arrangements, the small machinery of order that followed this kind of event. Alleyn, who could cast a polite net with a word or two, spoke to the room. "If you'll forgive me, I should like to ask that everyone remain in the house for a little while. There will be time to rest presently. Lady Beaumont, might we use your library? It will be the quieter." "Of course," she said. Her voice held for a moment a thread of relief at being asked to do something practical. "Benton, we'll show you." He turned again to the girl, and in that moment one small disobedient detail presented itself. A fine, dark filament caught against the sapphire silk near her shoulder. Not hers. Too coarse, too straight. He noted it without moving it. Against the skirting board, a faint scuff on the paint near the open window at knee height. A trace only, where something had grazed. The perfume in the room had the even, refined quality of a house accustomed to visitors. Beneath it, that intrusive sweetness persisted, lessening as the draught worked. "Miss Moore," he said, merely to fix her name. "You were good enough to telephone. Thank you." She inclined her head. Sensible shoes, ink on the side of the right forefinger. "Yes, Inspector." He did not ask what he could infer. He let the silence extend by a second, then turned the half-inch necessary to include Sir Marcus. "You would prefer to sit, perhaps," he suggested. It was not a question, and Sir Marcus did not accept it. "No, thank you," to Lady Beaumont. "You had guests for a private view and supper?" And when she nodded, "Then we will, if we may, have a list of the company and the staff on duty." It was all quite ordinary, his manner implied. Matters would proceed. They did. Fox returned to report in a voice pitched for Alleyn's ear alone. The necessary calls had been made, a photographer on the way, the divisional men at the door. Alleyn allowed himself an instant's look at the painting, the way the painted light lay on a painted surface, a stillness that the living room now echoed with terrible fidelity. He turned to the young man, Lethbridge, and said nothing. It was often the kindest form of address. The young man steadied without looking steadier. Graves avoided his eye with a dexterity that suggested practice. The colonel's gaze went once to the window, once to the glass, and came back obediently to neutral. "We will begin in the library," Alleyn said, as one announces the next figure in a dance. Very quietly and very briefly. "Mr. Benton, the order of service just as it comes. We won't keep anyone long." He stepped back across the threshold and, as he did, touched the door with his gloved hand, closing it to a courteous inch. Behind him, the mantel clock counted evenly on. Ahead, the muted corridor opened like a stage wing to the next arrangement of actors and words. He was content, for the moment, with what he had been given. A room that had said more than its occupants, and a company that had not yet learned how to say nothing at all. By the time the police surgeon had completed his quiet duties and the body was removed with as much grace as could be contrived, the house had resumed a brittle composure. Lady Beaumont, with the steady courage of a good hostess under bombardment, had suggested the morning room for Inspector Alleyn's interviews. It was a pale, rather rigid chamber where the furniture stood in obedient. Lines and the portraits of previous Beaumonts declined to moderate their opinions. Alleyn, who had made his first circuit of the drawing-room in silence, now sat where the lamplight fell kindly, his long hands unoccupied, and his expression one of attentive readiness. Fox, stolid as a church pew and twice as comforting, took up a discreet post near the door. Lady Beaumont came first. She settled opposite him, a small spray of diamonds shivering faintly at her throat, and met him with the composed directness of a woman who accepts necessary intrusions. "Mrs. Ashford's niece was very dear to us," she said. "There must be no talk if we can prevent it. But I understand the law, Inspector. What would you like to know?" "Only what you observed," Alleyn said. His voice had the civil softness of a guest asking for more cream. "Miss Ashford left the music room soon after supper began." "Yes, she asked for air. I directed Benton to open the windows in the drawing room. She had complained of a slight headache. The champagne was perfectly good. We've been using the same case at my dinners this week." "Who handed her the glass?" "I cannot be certain. The service was buffet, but Benton supervised." "You saw no quarrel? No agitation?" "There are always nerves at such an evening. But no scene, Inspector. We do not have scenes." She paused, then after a moment. "Sir Marcus received a message. It unsettled him. That is the only ripple I noticed." Alleyn inclined his head. "Thank you. If you would be so kind as to ask Sir Marcus to join me." Sir Marcus entered with the look of a man who has been assisting at his own inquest. The fine hands interlaced, unsteady, and the painter's eye, usually bright, seemed preoccupied by some inward arrangement that would not quite resolve upon the canvas. "I understand the necessity," he said before Alleyn had spoken, "but I confess my capacity is limited." "I shall require only what is bearable," Alleyn murmured. "The message, Sir Marcus?" "A trifling matter of business." He offered a small, conscientious smile that did not reach his eyes. "An irritating client and a question of provenance. It can wait." Alleyn let the word hang. "Provenance?" "Yes. You know the dreadful modern habit of doubting what is under one's nose." He looked up suddenly. "Miss Ashford did not suffer, I think?" "The surgeon believes it was very swift." Sir Marcus closed his eyes. "She had insight. About the work, I mean. And kindness. I take frightfully to kindness." He rose, then checked himself. "I will remain at Lady Beaumont's disposal." "Of course." At the door, Alleyn said very gently, "Who sent your message, Sir Marcus?" The painter's shoulder tightened. It came by hand from the gallery. Mr. Graves is better placed to explain. Timothy Graves was only too happy to be helpful. His spectacles fogged slightly at the corners. He took them off and polished them as if clarity might be conjured with a handkerchief. The message concerned a letter, he said. We have a persistent correspondent about the Pemberton oeuvre. A crank, if you will. I told Miss Moore to bring it at once to Sir Marcus because Lady Beaumont prefers irritants dealt with promptly. Miss Moore was the messenger. Yes, she is tireless. The letter was nonsense. Some suggestion that an early landscape had been misattributed. Nothing to do with the portrait tonight? Good heavens, no. Graves swallowed. Miss Ashford admired the portrait. She was an intelligent critic. Did she share her opinions with you? In generalities, we were on good terms. I admired her manner of attending. Alleyn considered him for a moment. You mentioned a scent earlier. Yes. Almonds. It may have been a fancy. I read too many detective novels. He attempted a smile and failed. Thank you, Mr. Graves. Do ask Mr. Lethbridge to come in. Peter Lethbridge entered with the pale bravado of a young officer recalling himself from the brink of disorder. He stood instead of sitting, as if to remain vertical were a point of honor. You cared for Miss Ashford, Alleyn said. Not a question. Yes. It came out like a cough. After a moment he added, I meant to speak to her. Tonight, if I could catch 5 minutes without a committee. Had she given you reason to hope? He gave a short, wretched laugh. She had given me no reason to despair. Did you see whom she spoke with last in the music room? Graves hovered. He always hovers. Sir Marcus stared at her as if she were a problem in light and shade. Ada Moore watched everyone and pretended not to. Forgive me. I'm not being helpful. You are. Did Miss Ashford have enemies? Enemies? No. People who resented her. Naturally, she was formidable without trying. Resented her for what? For seeing through them, he said and colored. I beg your pardon. I scarcely know what I am saying. When Lethbridge had gone, Miss Ada Moore presented herself with an efficiency that could have been mistaken for composure. Seated, hands folded, she might have been reading a ledger inscribed upon the air. You brought the letter, Alleyn said. Yes, Inspector. From the gallery. Mr. Graves considered it urgent. From whom? It was unsigned, sir. You did not recognize the hand. No, sir. Alleyn allowed a small silence. You managed Sir Marcus's affairs, his appointments and correspondence. You opened the letter? No, sir. She looked down at her sensible shoes. I thought it best he read it first. Quite so. He waited. Miss Moore, were you fond of Miss Ashford? I respected her. That is not what I asked. Miss Moore's gaze, surprisingly direct, met his. I did not like what fame does to clever girls, sir. It is unkind. When she had gone, Alleyn remained seated, looking at the small pattern of light trembling on the carpet. Fox shifted, almost inaudible. Sir, Fox murmured. In a moment, Fox. Through the open door, he could see the shape of Benton against the hall's calm order, the discreet solidity of a man who knew where every glass had stood and how every tray had traveled. The household revolved upon such people. They did not lie. They simply arranged the truth according to custom. Ask Benton, if you please, Alleyn said. Gently. He will have the thing we need, and he will not want to give it. By the time the household had yielded its first polished impressions to Inspector Alleyn, and the doctor had departed with quiet phrases about further examination, the rhythm below stairs had steadied itself into that discreet efficiency which is its own kind of courage. Alleyn, who had a gift for being present without intruding, allowed Lady Beaumont to steer her distressed cousins and guests into the music room, and then drifted, no other word suited, toward the green baize swing door that gave on the service passage. Benton was in the pantry, aligning glasses as if it mattered desperately that their rims should make a single, gleaming line. The light struck silver and calm on the scullery's white tiles, and somewhere, faintly, the bellboard ticked to itself with that air of muted conscience that belongs to well-run houses. "I'm afraid I must have a word, Benton," Alleyn said, his tone almost apologetic. "Forgive the tediousness of it." "Very good, sir." Benton's face, composed and decent, had gathered into it the house's collective discretion. He neither volunteered nor refused. "The champagne," Alleyn began. "Who poured?" I asked, because Miss Ashford's glass lay near her. "It was I, sir, save when Miss Ashford took hers in the drawing-room. For the supper proper, the footman Jarvis and I served from trays. Earlier, during the viewing, a side table was set with a cooler and 2 open bottles. I kept watch, sir. That is to say, mostly." "Mostly?" "There was the messenger, sir. A front bell at 5 minutes past 9 by the clock." I answered, naturally. Mr. Graves came along the passage wanting wine for Sir Marcus. I told him I'd be but a moment. When I returned, 2 minutes at most, the party had moved toward the music room. The table had been disturbed. Nothing irregular, sir. Merely a few glasses shifted. "And Miss Ashford?" "She had a glass in hand as she crossed. I noticed because of the necklace." "One does notice, sir." Alleyn looked past Benton at the bellboard. Little enameled tabs, front, drawing room, morning room, sat in neat order like an address book. The front bell disc still showed red. Another, music, cocked obliquely, as if it had been rung and not quite reset. He filed it, without comment. "You've a good nose, I dare say," Alleyn said. Several persons remarked on an unusual scent. Benton's gaze went to the polished drainboard. "I should not presume to name it, sir. It was an air that didn't belong in a drawing-room. The ladies' perfumes are known to us. Miss Ashford, if I may, wore a light, dry sort. Violets. Tonight, near her glass, there was—" He paused. "A sweetness, sir, that had a bite to it." "Did you touch the glass?" "No, sir. The colonel asked me not to. I moved nothing in that room but the window latch, at Lady Beaumont's direction." "Thank you." Alleyn let the silence sit a second. "You keep the wine cellar yourself?" "I do, sir. The champagne was laid in last week. 2 bottles already opened for the viewing. No one but myself has the key to the cellaret." "And yet you were drawn away." Benton's mouth softened, not far from regret. "One cannot be in 2 places at once, sir." In the still room, Mrs. Dalmay, the housekeeper, had set herself to accounts with a pencil as sharp as her expression. Alleyn took the chair she indicated as if it were a privilege and asked about cloaks, the conservatory door, and the ordinary habits of Lady Beaumont's evenings. "Nothing out of course," Mrs. Dalmay said. "Her ladyship entertains as she lives, punctual and unflurried. The conservatory door is kept on the latch for air." Miss Ashford declined a rap. "Finch, that's her ladyship's maid, offered one. The young lady said she wasn't cold. Headache, perhaps. One hears things at a dressing-table one wouldn't repeat." "Quite," said Alleyn, with a slight inclination of the head that showed he understood the compact. Finch, when summoned, stood like a reed in a draught. "She was all brightness, sir, but strained, if I may say. It's in the eyes. She had the small bag with her, a little blue beaded thing. Later I saw it on the pier table by the long mirror. I'd have set it aside, only—" Finch's hands gave the ghost of a movement. "Only there was the business." "You noticed a scent?" Alleyn asked. "Not hers, sir. Miss Ashford keeps to orris and violet. What I noticed was after, a sweetish smell. It clung to the glove I moved from the carpet when the colonel told me. I've set the glove aside, sir, as you said, in tissue." "Thank you." Alleyn rose. "You've been very helpful without saying anything you oughtn't." A faint, grateful flicker crossed the maid's face. "Yes, sir." He found Ada Moore in the anteroom with the telephone, sitting very straight, her hands composed on her lap. Up close, her plainness gathered dignity. "You were the conduit for Sir Marcus's message," Alleyn said, easy as an old acquaintance. "It discomposed him, one gathers." "It was from the foundry," she said after a perceptible pause. "A matter to do with the bronze. They are not reliable men." Alleyn looked at her without emphasis. "Very troublesome foundries." Her gaze did not quite meet his. "I did not read the note," she added. "I dislike the suggestion that secretaries pry." "Of course," he smiled. "You will forgive me one more small thing. When the messenger came, did you happen to pass the drawing-room table?" "I did not enter," she said. "I waited by the door while Sir Marcus read the note." The hands on her lap tightened and loosened. "Mr. Graves was poring. He is anxious to be useful." "An amiable form of anxiety," said Alleyn, and left her with that, which brought the faintest alteration to her expression. In the covered way to the mews, the chauffeur, Payne, smoked in the legal manner of men on call. He had seen Miss Ashford on the terrace for half a minute, no more, standing by the laurel tubs, the sapphires making their own light. She had not been alone every moment. Young Mr. Lethbridge came to her, then went. She went in. Alleyn walked back through the passages where heat and polish, old brass and beeswax, made their domestic perfume. He had been told, with commendable propriety, almost nothing. Yet among the omissions a little fact had settled like dust. A bell rung from the music room when Benton was not there. A glass that had moved. A scent that did not belong. A bag left on a pier table and later found elsewhere. The household clung to its decorum as ivy to stone, but ivy, too, betrays the cracks it follows. He returned to the drawing-room and stood where the painting might have seen what people do when they believe they are mere outlines against a canvas. Somewhere, not far, the bellboard gave a neat, restrained click and steadied again, as if the house itself had remembered a duty. Alleyn returned to the drawing-room in the early light, when the house, having passed its night of shock, resumed the soft, punctual sounds of its ordinary life. It was his habit to look again when the stage was bare of players. He found Benton already at work in a subdued way, setting to rights what could be mended and leaving undisturbed what must wait upon the yard's proprieties. "You keep a very exact house, Mr. Benton," Alleyn said, "not as praise, but as statement." "I hope so, sir," Benton replied. "Her ladyship expects it." Alleyn moved with slow attention through the spaces, not touching, not yet. The tall windows, fractionally open, admitted a rinsed October light that made the silk walls seem paler, the faint dust in the air more candid. On the console near the door lay the silver guest tray Lady Beaumont provided for delicate sensibilities, a vinaigrette, a fan of black ostrich plumes, a cut crystal flask traditionally filled with lavender water. He paused. "This is not lavender," he said. "No, sir. I discovered that last night when Dr. Curtis asked for smelling salts. The scent is, well, almondy, sir. It is not our usual preparation." "Who's doing?" "I could not say. Mrs. Frost, the housekeeper, would never order almond. Her ladyship dislikes it. It clings to the curtains." Alleyn removed the crystal stopper and took the faintest breath. The perfume was gentle, cultivated, and yet on its edge, as if some echo of a harsher cousin had pitched its note a fraction sharp. He replaced the stopper and turned to the mantel, where the clock marked the hour with a self-possessed tick. He set a fingertip on the case, then on the bell-pull rope beside it, feeling for the dust's signature. A small, clear arc interrupted the film along the marble. Recent handling, an unfamiliar reach. He said nothing. "You served champagne both in the music room and here?" "Yes, sir. Trays in both rooms. Continuous service. It is our custom at these events." "Opinion about the custom?" he asked softly. Benton hesitated, then gave him a properly measured look. I do not hold with wandering glasses, sir. A place is a place. If I may speak, you may. The rule is that once a guest takes a glass, they keep it. There can be confusion otherwise. There had been confusion. On the small occasional table nearest the painting lay the coupe they had not removed. Alleyn drew closer. Lipstick. A very slight granular film inside the rim. He bent as if consulting the grain of the wood and saw beneath the table a silver sugar spoon, one of those narrow-bowled, faintly scalloped affairs from a fine Georgian tea service, fallen against the spindle of a leg. "You serve sugar with champagne at Lady Beaumont's?" Alleyn asked. "Most certainly not, sir. Her ladyship would object." "It is." Benton managed a delicate strain. "Provincial. Where, then, does this spoon belong?" "To the afternoon tea in the small morning room. It was accounted for before guests arrived. I locked the caddy at 7:30. Alleyn let silence do part of the work. Benton shifted. "Last night, sir, someone asked me, very politely, if we might contrive a lump for their glass. I said, without naming her ladyship, that it would not be possible. The spoon must have been taken after that. I regret I cannot say by whom." "But you could if you would," Alleyn thought. That was not quite the same as lying. Aloud he said, "Did you notice any guest with the old-fashioned habit?" Benton's face arranged itself into neutrality. "Some gentlemen of the Colonel's generation, sir, have been known to ask. Mr. Graves is partial to sweetened wines, though I have never observed him to tamper with champagne. Mr. Lethbridge," he broke off, and his discretion closed over the words like a lid. "Thank you," said Alleyn, as if nothing had been tendered. He looked again at the coupe. The faint crystals at the rim were not sugar, he suspected, but what sugar had failed entirely to dissolve. A lump could carry cargo. A ritual altered. Is a bell rung. He crossed to the hearth. The fire had been laid but not lit earlier. Now the grate was clean, the ashpan emptied very recently. "Who ordered a fire last night? After the doctor left?" "No one, sir. Mrs. Frost would have had my head. We left the fires cold on account of the number of guests. Yet there is a residue of ash under the grate. Very slight." He knelt, peered, and with a pencil teased out the ghost of a burned edge of paper. It crumbled obligingly. The scent, above the faint coal smell, was, he could not quite place it, gummed envelope, cheap ink, and just perceptible almond. Sir Marcus's urgent message had promised to be seen to on the morrow. Perhaps part of the morrow had occurred in the night. Alleyn rose. He let his eye travel once more across the room's small vows to order. The fan precisely closed the wrong way round. The crystal flask filled with what it ought not to hold. A spoon that had strayed where it had no business to be. On the piano, a stack of programs from the exhibition had been squared to a nicety. The top one bore an impression as if a heavy signet had once rested there. He touched the faint circle and thought of a ring he had noticed on a particular hand. Too large, slightly vulgar, on a man who would have preferred not to be thought so. "Thank you, Mr. Benton," he said, almost abstractedly. "We will leave this room as it is a while longer." As he left, he noted with that inward click of recognition he never announced that the house's habits, adhered to over years, were beginning to speak. Not loudly, in their way, not at all. But they had their tale to tell, and the tale did not begin with death. It began earlier, with a small indulgence asked for and granted by no one, a message that unsettled an artist, a perfume that was not lavender. He would, for the present, keep it all to himself. He had discovered that the hush before a drawing-room confession was best prepared not with declarations, but with the almost invisible correction of a fan. The house woke to a pale October morning that seemed, by a kind of tact, to withhold its brightness. Alleyn, who had left Beaumont House in the small hours, only to return at 9 with the discretion of a doctor paying a second call, found the air of the place altered. Silence moved softly in and out of rooms. Doors were opened and shut as gently as fans. Lady Beaumont received him in her morning room. A faint fragrance of orris hung about the fire, and the remains of a restrained breakfast sat on a lacquered tray. Benton, in soft-footed attendance, supplied the necessary sandwiches of fact. The coroner's officer had been. The body, under Alleyn's instruction, had not yet been removed pending certain formalities. The household had sent respectful messages of excuse to those who needed to be told. Sir Marcus had not slept. Miss Moore had not left his side. Mr. Graves had telephoned the gallery at 8 and spoke with some agitation to the head porter. Peter Lethbridge had remained, at Lady Beaumont's insistence, in a guest room. The colonel had gone out for a walk at 7 and returned looking, Benton ventured, as if the parade had misfired. "Thank you," Alleyn said. He observed the tray. There was one cup untouched. Lady Beaumont followed his glance without comment. "If you please, my lady," he said after a moment. "The necklace." There was the smallest pause. Benton went away and returned with a shallow velvet-lined case that had been newly supplied. Within it, against the violet nap, the famous stones lay in a severe, concentrated splendor. They were quiet and very blue. Alleyn took a chair by the window and, with a care that was almost ceremonious, lifted the necklace. He had handled such things before. Crowns of a sort that rested not on brows, but on reputations. The mounts were Georgian, finely worked, a pattern of articulate sentiment. He turned the clasp. There was a newer catch soldered to the old, a safety chain with its minute snap left unfastened. "You will forgive me, my lady," he said, and sent a message to Fox. Within half an hour, a discreet little man in sober clothes made his appearance, Mr. Coppinger from Bruton Street, who examined for 3 minutes and took a breath that could not quite be called audible. "Well?" Alleyn asked, as if inquiring about the weather. "Exceedingly good," said Mr. Coppinger with professional sorrow, "but not Sapphire's." Lady Beaumont's hands tightened and then lay still upon the arm of her chair. One would not have known, save for that first fractional movement, that the room had tilted. "Paste," Mr. Coppinger added after a minute. "Very superior. Foil-backed. Whoever did them had an eye to drawing-room light. Daylight is less forgiving." Alleyn nodded. "How long would such a substitution take, Mr. Coppinger?" "In a well-managed confusion, minutes. The mounts are original, you see. It's only the contents that have been exchanged. The clasp, if I may, has been fiddled with recently. Not clumsily, neatly." "Thank you," Alleyn said, and saw him out. Lady Beaumont did not immediately speak. When she did, her voice was steady. "The Ashford sapphires were often lent. They are in the keeping of Vivian's mother, or were." "You did not send for them," Alleyn said, "for this evening?" "I did not. Vivian arrived with them. She was always punctilious about such things. I cannot think—" She stopped, then added, with the faintest lift of her chin, "I cannot think." The morning's post arrived while they sat in that composed quiet. Benton placed the letters on a small table and withdrew. Alleyn, with a nod of inquiry, saw Lady Beaumont draw one envelope toward her. There were 2 for Sir Marcus, 1 for Mr. Graves, a typed communication for the colonel. The hand on Sir Marcus's second letter, pointed, graceful, might have served to teach a schoolroom the elegance of loops. "It has the air," Lady Beaumont murmured, "of a woman's note." "May I?" Alleyn asked. She rang. "Benton, will you take this to Sir Marcus with Chief Inspector Allen's compliments and ask if, under the circumstances, he prefers to open it here?" Sir Marcus came in a few moments later with Miss Moore walking at his shoulder. He looked older. There was that about his eyes which sometimes marks men who have not merely been awake but have kept vigil over a thought. He took the envelope, turned it, and glanced up, not at Lady Beaumont, not at Alleyn, but at Miss Moore, who met his look and steadied it with her own. He opened the letter, a single sheet. His hand, Alleyn noticed, remained perfectly steady. He read it and handed it to Alleyn without comment. At 9 by the Pemberton. Alleyn felt the lightest alteration in the room's atmosphere, as if someone had opened a door to a corridor one didn't know existed. The Pemberton could only mean the large portrait in the drawing room. 9 o'clock, the hour at which Miss Ashford had excused herself. "Do you recognize the hand, Sir Marcus?" "I think," Sir Marcus said and stopped. "It resembles Miss Ashford's." His voice had a diffident candor. "But I am not a graphologist." Miss Moore's hands were carefully folded. Miss Ashford wrote a rapidly elegant hand, Chief Inspector. "This appears—" She hesitated. "This appears to imitate it." Alleyn stood. He felt with that shiver of intuition that is not argument but a kind of informed sensation, the faint stirrings of a second pattern beneath the first. He turned the sheet to the light. There was a scent upon it, something faintly floral, smudged with a counterfeit almond. It might have been nothing more sinister than ladies' soap. He returned the letter. "May I keep this for a little while?" "Whatever is necessary," Lady Beaumont said. "Thank you. Sir Marcus, your messenger of last night. The urgent note. We have not yet traced him." "It was a boy," Miss Moore said. 12 or 13. Cap pulled low. He disappeared at once." "Convenient," Alleyn murmured. "Mr. Graves?" Timothy Graves had entered quietly, as if drawn by the magnetic field of a new fact. He looked at the letter as one might look at a portrait of a person one half knows and half fears to meet. "It could be hers," he said unhelpfully. "It could be anyone's." "Precisely." Alleyn allowed the silence to settle and held it there. Then, almost casually, "There is another small matter. The sapphires." He saw the look pass like a tiny bird from Sir Marcus to Miss Moore, and from Miss Moore to Lady Beaumont, who did not move. Mr. Graves blinked. Then, when nobody else spoke, he said in a dry voice, "Stolen." "Substituted," Alleyn answered. "We must not alarm the world. We will, I think, alarm nobody at all." He watched them occupy the news, each according to character. The artist made, despite himself, an involuntary little movement of the hand, as if arranging elements on a canvas. The secretary's capable fingers closed upon the edge of a chair. Lady Beaumont's chin lifted by the height of a pin's head. Mr. Graves's breath came a shade faster. And through it all, Alleyn felt his own thought settle, a dusting down rather than a click, upon a pattern that was still assembling itself, quietly, in the dark. "Let us go on," he said. "There will be very little noise." It was not late by London's livelier standards, but Lady Beaumont's house had fallen into that guarded quiet that follows a disaster politely contained. The guests had been ushered away with discreet assurances. A doctor had come and gone, leaving the room diminished and carefully shut. Fox, having taken the constable and photographer through their mild office, had returned to the library where Alleyn sat with a notebook unopened before him, as if writing would vulgarize the thing he wished to consider. "Doctor says prussic acid," Fox reported softly. "Fast-acting. The scent would be right. He won't be pinned to a source without the lab, but he's as sure as doctors ever are." Alleyn nodded. The lamplight, reflected in the black glass of the window, made of his profile an abstract. Fine bones, the faintest suggestion of weariness. "Yes," and delivered with elegance enough to satisfy the company. Fox, who knew his chief's turns, said nothing. There was a pause in which the mantel clock sounded unduly conscientious. "The glass?" Alleyn asked at last. "In the drawing-room, near the sofa. Small, liqueur. Only Miss Ashford's prints as yet, and one smudge. Nothing usable. Benton swears no liqueurs were served before the first course. Lady Beaumont confirms it. It's not their habit." "That," said Alleyn, "is our first useful thing." To kill in a drawing room is vulgar. To kill against the grain of the household is careless. Yet he, or she, did both, which suggests either a stranger to the ritual or someone who counted on the ritual to disguise a breach. Fox glanced at his notes. "We've the notes, sir. Found in the little beaded bag. Air, 5 minutes by the Beaumont portrait. M. The M could stand for a crowd. So it could." Alleyn's tone was mild. "And the other letter, the one delivered to Sir Marcus earlier, has, I think, the same hand. Amiable roundness with a school prize flourish and a tendency to press hard on the descenders. It wished him to be troubled, and he obliged. 2 birds taken away from their flock without fuss. That points to a temperament that dislikes scenes and plans to the minute. I do not know who owns it. I have a suspicion who might have admired it." He rose and moved to the window, his gaze on the reflection of the room rather than the street beyond. "Tell me of our people." Lady Beaumont, shaken, angry in a tidy way, keeps asking if the newspapers might be managed. Colonel Westbrook, steady as she goes, was in the music room with a story at the relevant time. Peter Lethbridge, badly cut up, wanted to say he'd have married her, but thought better of it. Sir Marcus, distracted before and after. His secretary, Miss Ada Moore, seems a tower. She made the telephone call, kept the staff going, and brought the shawl. The assistant curator, Mr. Graves, left the room once to return a catalogue somewhere, says he. He was retching when we found him after, but the doctor thinks that was shock. Mr. Graves carries his nerves like a banner, Alleyn said. He is a man in whom devotion and envy would be cousins. Miss Moore, he added, has an admirable stillness. Admirable stillnesses are sometimes the result of long practice. And Benton sticks to his book, Fox offered. He won't quite say it, but there's something he thinks improper in how that little glass found its way to the drawing room. He's not going to betray whoever did it unless you make him. I shouldn't dream of making him, said Alleyn gently. Benton is a butler. One handles him as one handles an old master, lightly at the edges. He turned back to the desk. The notebook lay open now, though he did not write. We have these shapes. A young woman who had opinions about paintings and perhaps about the men who painted them. An artist at the point in life where success turns the screw on old compromises. A secretary whose life is made of other people's emergencies. A nervous assistant who has learned to live on reflected light. A gallant boy who is tired of waiting. And a hostess for whom order is the highest civility. The poison sits among them like a small, perfect object, sharp, convenient, and dreadfully out of place. Fox shifted, not quite comfortably. Motive, sir. Character, Alleyn said. Motive will emerge from character, as a tide leaves the line of its reach in the sand. Miss Ashford's dress, her necklace, the particular deference she was shown, that tells us how she was regarded. The little note tells us how she was lured. The larger letter, how Sir Marcus was removed. Someone who arranges people as if they were furniture will not have enjoyed Miss Ashford's habit of moving herself. Then you don't feel it's a stranger? A gatecrasher, say? No, Alleyn said. This is an indoor crime. He closed the notebook without having put a word in it. Miss Ashford's glass was not a champagne flute. She had set hers down, we think. Her lipstick on the rim, the bubbles gone. The liqueur glass, where did it come from? Not the music room. Lady Beaumont is strong on order. If a servant had brought it against that order, he would do so only on instruction. If a guest had fetched it, he, or she, would have to know where to find it without fuss. And only one person in this group consistently speaks of headaches. Fox looked up. Miss Ashford? Miss Moore, Alleyn said, almost idly. Not a fact, Fox. A sound, that's all. A quick word to justify going and coming. I do not accuse her. I observe the music. He smiled a little at Fox's expression. We shall be sensible presently. For the moment I prefer dust. Let it settle. He went to the door and opened it to the still corridor. At the far end, the drawing-room lay in an enforced neatness, the sofa straightened, the rug smoothed, the place where the sapphire dress had spread itself now very modest. He stood looking a moment, as if the arrangement would offer him some small amendment to the past. "Tomorrow," he said, half to Fox, half to the house, "we'll ask Miss Moore to show us Sir Marcus's studio, and ask Mr. Graves to tell us about catalogues that go missing when nervous men need air. We'll ask Lady Beaumont how she keeps her keys, and we shall ask Benton nothing at all and hope he tells us something." He shut the door gently. The lamplight made a soft island in the library. In the hush that followed, Alleyn felt the shape of his idea assume itself. Not complete, not even comfortable, but present in the way a shadow is present, dependent on where one stands and on where the light is placed. By midnight, the rooms had quieted into that formal stillness peculiar to large houses after calamity. The police surgeon had come and gone with the gentlest of official courtesies, and the few remaining guests, Colonel Westbrook, Sir Marcus, Peter Lethbridge, and Timothy Graves, sat low-voiced in Lady Beaumont's morning room over coffee that no one seemed able to drink. Somewhere in the back region, a clock chimed the quarter, and the sound fell, tidy and unemotional, into the hush. Alleyn, who had made himself almost invisible during these last hours, stood at the far window and watched the rain begin to stipple the black glass. He had, earlier, examined the little ante-room off the drawing-room where Miss Ashford had doubtless paused for air, had looked with an unhurried eye at the silver tray Benton kept for the first champagne service, had fingered, without remark, the clasp of the sapphire necklace before it was placed in a velvet case at Lady Beaumont's insistence. He had also, quite quietly, asked Benton to ring the messenger firm whose boy had brought Sir Marcus that urgent paper. Benton had done so, and Alleyn had listened, hands loosely behind his back, while the disembodied voice conveyed its polite surprise. No boy had been sent to Beaumont House that evening. He turned now to Miss Ada Moore, who waited exactly where he had asked her to wait, a little apart. There was nothing dramatic in her appearance. She had removed her hat, and her capable hands were folded, but there was an indefinable suggestion of someone who had taken up a position and meant to hold it. "Miss Moore," Alleyn said, his manner so mild that it seemed designed to soothe rather than probe. "You were good enough to manage the practicalities this evening when others were, understandably, unequal to them. Might I trouble you further in the small library?" She inclined her head. In the library, with its green-shaded lamp and books ordered in uncompromising ranks, he offered her a chair and took one himself, not opposite but slightly to the side, a conversational angle rather than an interrogation. "I should be grateful," he began, "if you would tell me about the note you brought to Sir Marcus." She looked at him, briefly and directly. "It came by messenger. I was told it was urgent." "Just so," Alleyn agreed. "Only it appears to have made use of Lady Beaumont's writing paper. The watermark is distinctive, one of those small economies that prove inconvenient later." He smiled faintly, as if to spare her. "Did you find an envelope to fit on the nearest desk by any chance?" Her hands, those exact and serviceable hands, did not tremble. "If there is some suggestion of improper conduct—" "There is a suggestion," he said, and his voice was absolutely courteous, "of foresight. You have been, I think, Sir Marcus's foresight for some time, to ease his hours, to prevent small storms from troubling him. It is a generous occupation." She looked down. "He is an artist, Mr. Alleyn." "So he is. And artists do not always manage their weather." He waited. "You helped Miss Ashford with her necklace." "She asked me to," Miss Moore said at once. "There was a difficulty with the clasp. I have done such things before for Lady Beaumont's guests." "Of course." He studied the back of his hand. "It is an admirable clasp. Ingenious. One notices, however, that the safety, which knowledgeable women prefer on the left, was fastened on the right this evening. One notices also the faint gum on the catch. It may be the residue of a cleaner, or it may be from a paper strip that had recently adhered. She said nothing. In the silence, the clock in the passage marked off a single decorous tick. "I should not be quite fair," Alleyn said at last, "if I did not tell you that Benton's ritual, that first champagne is never offered in the drawing-room after 8, is one by which I set some store. The glass by Miss Ashford's hand did not come from his tray. It was prepared elsewhere. The servants' passages are full of small conventions. When they are broken, the break is illuminating." Miss Moore lifted her head. "You make much," she said evenly, "of very little." "It is my trade." He rose. "I will not distress you further tonight. You will forgive me if I ask you, everyone, to remain in the house until morning. Then, when we are a little less fatigued, we shall talk again. Perhaps together, perhaps privately. I think it will be less painful to make certain acknowledgments when all the small facts are in one place." He held the door for her, and they returned to the morning room. The little group there turned their faces toward the doorway with that same mixture of hope and dread one sees in audiences during a quiet moment before the curtain falls. Alleyn, with an easy word to Lady Beaumont, arranged the remaining practicalities: the rooms that would be prepared, the footman stationed by the telephone, the discreet policeman in the hall whose presence need not be noticed. Sir Marcus rose, the movement revealing a man who had aged in an hour. "Must we sit through the night?" he asked, almost to himself. "Not sit," Alleyn said. "Merely rest, and if sleep comes, accept it. In the morning there will be fewer shadows." He looked at Peter Lethbridge, whose youth wore its rawness without embarrassment, and then at Timothy Graves, who had mastered his nerves into a brittle composure. Colonel Westbrook gave a curt, grateful nod, military acknowledgment of decent command. Alleyn took up his hat and put it down again, a little domestic gesture that somehow reassured. "There is one other small matter. The letter, Sir Marcus. If you still have it, I should be grateful to look at it in daylight." Sir Marcus hesitated. "I destroyed it," he said. "It distressed me. Quite. We will speak of it in the morning." He offered Lady Beaumont a very slight bow. "Forgive me. I am merely rearranging chairs. The furniture, I believe, has already decided where it prefers to stand." When at last he was alone in the corridor, he paused before the darkened drawing-room. The easel stood sentinel. Beyond it, the long shimmer of the sapphire dress, now folded and hidden, existed only as a memory of color upon the mind's eye. He thought of the clasp under the gentle lamp, the small conventions that had failed, and the steadiness with which Miss Moore had looked at him. His intuition settled, not with triumph, but like the rain that had begun outside, quiet, inevitable, washing the pavements clean for morning. They were gathered, at Alleyn's request, in Lady Beaumont's morning room, where the light was kind even to the unready. The turmoil of the night had subsided into that subdued order which follows a calamity in well-conducted houses. The coal fire made a decorous murmur. On the writing table, a bowl of white cyclamen seemed to have adopted a vigil. Alleyn stood with his back to the fire, his hands loosely clasped, his voice pitched for conversation rather than announcement. He had asked that they all be present, Lady Beaumont, still and pale, Sir Marcus, remote behind a fatigue that had gone past sleep, Miss Moore, her great hands steadied upon her lap, Colonel Westbrook, squarely composed, Peter Lethbridge, with a reticence that looked like injury bravely managed, Benton erect by the door, and Timothy Graves, folded into himself, as if seeking the smallest reasonable occupation of space. "I am sorry," Alleyn said, and there was no artifice in it. "There is no way to make this comfortable. We have established, I believe, the essential circumstances. The method was simple. Miss Ashford died of hydrocyanic acid, administered in champagne." There was a minute's yielding silence. Sir Marcus drew in breath as if to speak, and did not. "In this house," Alleyn went on, "things happen by ritual. Mr. Benton's service is exact. Champagne belongs to the music room and nowhere else. Yet in the drawing room we found a glass, with Miss Ashford's lipstick upon it, and beneath the console by Sir Marcus's painting, a faint ring from a damp base. That ring had dried at the edges, which told me it had been standing there for some little time before her collapse. Not Benton then, but someone irregular, had carried it in. Benton bowed, a slight concession to accuracy. "We have the sugar," Alleyn said gently. "A single cube in that glass, different from the others in shape and texture. In Sir Marcus's workshop there is a bottle formerly used for the old-fashioned, dangerous business of cleaning gilt, the one that should, Miss Moore, have been discarded long ago." "It was marked poison, Inspector," Miss Moore said in a low voice. "I had impressed it upon Mr. Graves that it should not be touched." "Quite," said Alleyn. "The stopper was poorly replaced in haste, and on its neck a smear that has tested positive for cyanide. There is a small burn upon Mr. Graves's right cuff, where the fabric's dye has lifted slightly. A trick cyanide plays with certain blacks. These are trifles, perhaps. They become a pattern when placed next to what we have learned about last evening's letter." Sir Marcus stirred. "From Hargreaves," he said wearily. "He wrote that certain documents supporting the provenance of my early work were questionable. He named the dealer. He insinuated fraud." Miss Ashford, Alleyn said, had already seen enough to be alarmed. In her handbag were notes, "You will forgive me, Miss Moore," of a scrupulous sort. She had recognized, as a good scholar does, a hand that repeats itself in places where it should not. She proposed, I think, to speak to Lady Beaumont, and then to you, Sir Marcus, this morning, in terms as gentle as the matter allowed. Timothy Graves lifted his head. The spectacles he pushed up with a habitual forefinger made, in the hush, a small decisive sound. He looked not at Alleyn, but at the cyclamen. "She said," he whispered, "that it might be put right." She did not know how far it had gone. Lady Beaumont's eyes closed briefly, as if in prayer. Alleyn inclined his head. "You fetched the glass to the drawing-room," he said, not unkindly. "Mr. Benton saw you take 2 from the sideboard under pretense of assisting him. In the mounting room you found what you needed. You had time. When Miss Ashford left for air, you followed with solicitude and, I dare say, a convincing word about a restorative." It was all very quiet. Graves' hands opened upon his knees. They were unremarkable hands, with the faint polish of a man who has written more than he has lived. "I thought," he said, "it would be asleep, and end without—" He broke off, a flicker at the corner of his mouth that might have been contempt for his own poverty of invention. "The letter to Sir Marcus would be shown. My name would be there. I had bills. I'd—" His voice failed and returned, thinner. It began with a harmless improvement to a dull record. A touch here, a phrase there. Dealers said it was routine. Then there were the frames, and a paper I copied too well. She saw. She told me she would wait till morning. That was her error. She ought to have said nothing at all. "I think," Alleyn said, and the steadiness in his tone arrived with a kind of mercy, "it would have been your reprieve." No one moved. The clock on the mantel performed its small integer of time. Sir Marcus spoke without looking at Graves. "You used my house," he said, and the careful disdain of an artist for a bad solution passed through the room like a chill. "And you used her." Graves nodded once, as if acknowledging a point reasonably made. When he raised his head to Alleyn, there was in his face neither defiance nor appeal, only the nakedness of a man from whom invention has finally been withdrawn. "Must we?" he began, and found the word he wanted absurdly to be "now." "In a little while," Alleyn said. "There are formalities." He crossed to the window and drew the curtain a fraction, as if adjusting the light might ease the air. The room, with its measured comforts, received the conclusion without protest. Outside, the street lifted into a quiet morning. Inside, the truth, having as little drama as possible, settled into its place. Morning arrived with the quiet exactitude that always follows a night of disturbance in well-run houses. The autumn light lay thin upon Lady Beaumont's library, touching the leather spines and measured objects, paper knife, crystal bowl, a tiny bronze of a Greek runner, with an impersonal courtesy. Outside, muffled sounds indicated the discretion of servants who had been instructed and had understood that the day was to be conducted without comment. Alleyn had chosen the library for the simple, ceremonial reason that the desk belonged to the house, and therefore lent a sense of order to whatever was set down upon it. He sat a little aside, leaving the chair at the center of the rug unoccupied until it should be required. Inspector Fox, massive and undisturbing, occupied a place by the fireplace with the air of a kindly bear awaiting a child's confidence. Benton had stationed himself, without obvious intention, within range of the door. Timothy Graves entered between them. He might have been coming in to ask for a title page to be retyped, his neatness intact, his spectacles in place, his hair brushed with a care that did not conceal the fact that he had slept poorly. Only his hands, long and fine, betrayed something of the internal condition, the right pressed flat against the left as if to quiet it. If he saw Sir Marcus by the window, he made no sign. The artist had been there some time, staring out toward the oval of the square. He did not turn now. Miss Ada Moore was seated slightly behind Alleyn and might, unobserved, have been the secretarial presence that makes official action possible and human frailty bearable. Lady Beaumont had withdrawn after the preliminary civilities, her calm intact, her face a shade whiter than the morning asked of it. "We will ask you, Mr. Graves," Alleyn said, "to read what Sergeant Bailey has taken down and, if you find it accurate, to sign. We shall not hurry you." Graves glanced at the pages with fastidious hatred of their content. "It was not," he said in his precise voice, "intended for her. That is not a legal defense, I realize." He looked at Alleyn and then away, his gaze alighting with almost physical distaste on the fountain pen and the bowl of paper clips. "You have the routine, the tray, Benton's habit of placing the coupes in 2 ranks. Miss Ashford's glass set aside when she complained of the light, and someone, no doubt I, officiously put it back in play." He smiled without irony. "You are thorough, Chief Inspector." Alleyn's tone was courteous. "We have tried to be accurate. You had prepared a small bottle of what you told yourself was Ngaio, to be emptied into a glass at a convenient moment. You had reason to believe that someone else would thus be disposed of." Graves said, quickly and almost eagerly, "A warning drink, I told myself. Enough to frighten and no more. I was—" He broke off. "I find I cannot finish that sentence." Fox looked into the fire. Sir Marcus's hand on the window frame moved once and was still again. Miss Moore made a small sound and turned it into a cough. "Motives," Alleyn said, "do not alter facts, but they illuminate them. Miss Ashford had very quickly perceived that certain letters in the Beaumont catalogue were not what they pretended to be. She had gone further than a footnote. The note left for Sir Marcus last evening, the one Miss Moore delivered, enclosed a photograph of the earlier version of the Lambourne letter with dates that did not agree. You were, I think, by then aware of her intentions." Graves looked down. "Yes. She had a kind of terrible courtesy. She would have told Lady Beaumont privately this morning and Sir Marcus, and insisted on his being kept out of the public part of it if it could be done. She said as much. I believed, foolishly, that I could direct the crisis." His hands, pressed flat together, tightened. Sir Marcus would have been destroyed by scandal, the gallery compromised, my own arrangements exposed. It was too much to be borne. "The arrangements," Alleyn said quietly, "included more than persuasive. Footnotes, a forged provenance, 2 spurious letters, and a careful placing of works in a sale that would reflect well upon the new catalogue." "You make it sound vulgar," Graves said, but perhaps it was only that. "Yes." Benton, at the door, looked at Alleyn with the quick flick of regard that a well-trained manservant allows himself when he witnesses conduct beyond the ordinary. He had not told last night what he had seen. The unpracticed interference with his tray, the little hesitation of a gentleman not born to service. He had not told because it was not his place. He had, however, met Alleyn's eye, and the matter had been managed between them. Sir Marcus turned. "If," he said very quietly, "you imagined, Graves, that any mitigation could be made out of this." He stopped. "No, that is useless." He addressed Alleyn. "I did not know. I did not wish to know. It amounts, I suppose, to the same thing." Alleyn inclined his head. "I think, Sir Marcus, that the law makes distinctions. Character does also. The press, perhaps, does not. But we will not discuss the press." Graves took up the pen. He did not sit. He wrote his name with the meticulous hand of a man who loved order and had created chaos. When he laid the pen down, his fingers lingered upon it with an odd tenderness, as if it had been loyal when he had not. "Will there be—" He looked for the word and found the exact one. "Sensationalism." "We shall avoid it as far as we can," Alleyn said. "You will come with us now. There will be a doctor, Inspector Fox." Fox moved without weight towards him. There was, in his blunted gentleness, a kindness that had saved pride before and would do so again. Graves paused by Miss Moore. "I'm sorry," he said to her, in a tone that had no quality of asking for forgiveness. "You were always exact." Miss Moore's large hands folded. "It wasn't accuracy you wanted," she said very softly. "It was absolution." She looked not at him but at Sir Marcus, as if to make clear that sorrow could be kept separated from blame. "Sir." He inclined his head once. Graves went with Fox. Lady Beaumont came in briefly as the door closed. She stood perfectly upright, and her voice was measured. "Will you require me to—" "Not now," Alleyn said. "Later, perhaps, for a formal statement." She nodded. "Benton will see to luncheon." She glanced for a fraction of a second at the closed door and then at the square of light on the carpet. "I suppose one can still give luncheon. In these matters it is best, I find, to proceed." When they had gone, Sir Marcus spoke without looking at Alleyn. "She was very young," he said, "and there was such judgment and such mercy in her mind. The dress—" He stopped, and then, almost with impatience, brushed away the sentiment. "I beg your pardon. There is work to be done." "There is," Alleyn said. He stood for a moment, longer in the ordered room, hearing in imagination the distant, soft movement of men on a stone step, the opening of a car door, a careful closing. He became aware of the painting, through the long line of the library, leaning against the wall in the drawing-room where they had left it covered with a cloth. The form beneath was rectangular and impersonal. Its subject, like the morning, would be looked at differently now. He put his gloves in his pocket and went out to the square. Section 12 awaited him as inevitably as the remaining hours of the day. Morning found the drawing-room emptied of company and reclaimed by its own faint smells of beeswax and roses. The fire had not yet been laid. A pale wash of October light settled upon Sir Marcus's canvas and along the satin of the ropes that protected it, as if the room itself had taken to breathing quietly again after the disturbance. The inspector, Grey by name, a courteous man with a long, considerate face, stood near the mantel and looked not at the painting but at the small, undecorative objects that had witnessed the previous night. The low table, the displaced chair, the faint crescent of lipstick on a glass rinsed and set aside, not quite dry, its rim a duller circle in the cool light. Benton had done his work early. He always did. Grey found that reassuring, as one might take comfort in a clock that keeps proper time. Lady Beaumont came in without the ceremony of a knock. She wore a cardigan of the sort that favoured utility over appearance, but the pearl at her throat made the gesture of rank almost apologetically. "They have gone," she said. by which she meant the journalists at the gate. Benton told them there would be nothing until the coroner has spoken. Gray inclined his head in agreement. There will be very little of that, I think. The coroner appreciates concision. He glanced briefly at the painting. Your rooms are beautiful in this weather, Lady Beaumont. They ask one to speak softly. Softly, she repeated, as if the word might unlock something in the corners. I slept badly. Most people do, Gray said. It is a reasonable accommodation to the facts. He moved a step toward the windows and looked down, as if the square below had anything new to offer. You had a good staff response. The ordinary ritual, doors seen to, windows unlatched, the evening tray removed, asserted itself. One depends upon such rituals when things are untidy. She was silent for a moment. Then, do you think it ever stops? This sensation that one has been publicly careless, as if I'd failed to note how people were placed or what they poured for themselves. It will lessen, he said. Care is not measured by prevention. We do what is in character for us. He turned, and his smile was a small acknowledgement of human limitations rather than comfort. In any event, the matter is now comprehensible. She accepted that, without asking for the catalogue of comprehensions. She, too, had looked beneath the surface of talk and found the quiet, hard stones. Poor child, she said, and then, with a certain bleak fairness, added, poor all of us. Gray's gaze passed briefly over the vacant patch of carpet where a dress as blue as deep water had pooled. It is a curious thing, he said, how a room keeps an outline longer than it keeps a scent. Timothy will not come this morning, Lady Beaumont observed. He sent a note, some vague remark about the newspapers and the gallery. He is a competent young man, and, I think, equal to embarrassment. Competence and embarrassment are seldom mutually exclusive, Gray said not unkindly. Sir Marcus. Gone early to his studio with Mrs. Moore. He left a line for me that might be called gratitude if it were not so very tired. Gray considered this and let it settle. The clock, which had ticked through shock, inquiry, and the muted weeping of a house that had not wept in years, kept time with a sound that now seemed almost companionable. Outside, a car passed, unhurried. If I may, Lady Beaumont said, coming a little nearer, I should like to ask one question only, not for detail, for my conscience. She looked past him to the painting, a still life that concealed its own movement, and then down again. Was it inevitable? In the end, Gray said, the choice was inevitable. The method, no, that belonged to habit. People do not invent themselves at the last minute. They merely proceed in their accustomed fashion, a step too far. He paused, then added, last night's drama was written long before the curtain rose. She took this in as one accepts a bill one has known would arrive. You will come to the inquest? Yes. He glanced at the painting again. I've always disliked the word closure. Houses do not close. They are aired. Let the windows stand open. At the door she turned. Inspector, there is a line Miss Ashford used about Sir Marcus's brushwork. A held breath. I have been thinking of it since. Gray's eyes softened, then became unreadable again. Yes, he said, and sometimes the breath is let out without any sound at all. He gave a small bow that did not belong to performance, and was gone. Left alone, Lady Beaumont crossed to the window and drew the sash half up. The October air came in hesitantly, carrying the clean scent of stone and leaf. On the easel, light gathered along the quiet edge of paint. The room, which had observed everything and said nothing, resumed its watch with what might have been called dignity, if one believed in such qualities in furniture. When Benton came to lay the fire, he found the window open and the roses already turned a little toward the cold. He lit the kindling with his usual economy of movement, and in a moment the first modest flames began their work. No flourish, only warmth and the slow, unremarkable business of setting the air to rights.